back to KJ and Lyons on WEEI.
Yeah. KJ and Lyons, WEEI, 617-779-7937, text line 37937. Still to come, would you rather, more likely to either or in 20 minutes, plus, of course, another episode of the Lions Den. That's still to come. We're talking Patriots tomorrow, 4:05 against the Raiders. Let's go to Dan and Sandwich. Thanks so much for calling KJ and Lyons. You're on the air.
Hey, guys. How are you this afternoon?
Excellent.
I just tuned in a few minutes ago, so forgive me if I didn't hear the whole conversation, but I called on Thursday. My call got dropped because I was on my cell phone, but I just have a thought. I totally agree with what you said in the last few minutes about the Patriots offensive line, that it's a huge problem. I don't know what you've said about Mac Jones, but I don't think Mac Jones is the problem at all, because his first year, didn't he throw it about a 70% completion rate, and I think he was second highest in the NFL. So I think if you put a decent line in front of him, I think he could do a good job again. But the reason for my call is this, and I don't know if this is true. I have to ask you guys, and maybe you'll have to look it up. I was talking to my son the other day, and he said the Patriots are like 30th or 32nd in the league in spending, something like that, ridiculous. So, and he said they're so far behind, they're like $80 or $90 million behind the 15th or 16th place team, something like that. My thought is draft the guy, a couple of linemen, get a couple of linemen off of what do you call all the guys? Free agents when they come up this year. Don't we have a guy that left for free agency and is playing on the Philly line right now? Don't we have a guy that left and is playing on Kansas City's line right now? Aren't those two of the better teams in the NFL? Once again, my thought is you give the guy a good line. I think Mac will be fine. I'd love to have Jacoby Myers here, but Juju wouldn't be that bad if somebody could block. Watching the Chicago game the other day, the young guy there from Chicago had 3.5 seconds to throw the ball. Mac is being hit at 1.5 seconds. You can't get rid of a ball. Nobody can get open because they don't have time to run a route to get open. That's my thought.
Thanks for the call. John, your thoughts. Coach Lyons.
Yeah, so for me, look, I've said, and I said this earlier, I've said this for a while, I do think the offensive line is the number one issue, but I think Mac, independent of that, has not played well. I would disagree with the caller about the Juju Smith-Schuster thing, and I was dead wrong about that.
The previous call. Okay.
Yeah, I was a supporter of him over Jacoby Myers, and he just looks like he's not healthy anymore and he can't fit in, and Jacoby Myers, of course, looks pretty good. So I think that's an issue, too. And on the spending, they've been near the bottom of the league for quite a few years now in terms of overall cash spending, but still, they went out and committed $250 million in free agency a couple years ago. It's not like they've never spent it all. The issue is, since really, call it 2017, they've been inconsistent drafting-wise, and they've made several bad personnel decisions with those free agent dollars. So to me, I don't think you have to be number 1 or number 5 or even number 8 in spending to be a Super Bowl team, but you can't be 30th, you can't be 29th, and you got to make better decisions with and we're seeing that come home to roost. Like, they drafted Cole Strange in the first round. He's been pretty good sometimes, but then he can't stay on the field, and that's been an issue. They drafted Tyquan Thornton in the second round instead of George Pickens. Pickens looks great in Pittsburgh, and Thornton can't get on the field because of injuries. Hopefully he'll be back tomorrow. So I think, like, the caller, like the spending thing, like, I do think that's a part of it, but I think the drafting thing is part. When you look at, like, the big picture of, like, why are we here right now, I do think those things are part of it as well, in addition to just how bad some guys are playing right now.
Yeah, I've never been a fan of saying, hey, this guy who was drafted after that guy would be much better. They missed out on that guy, right? That's the one thing that I would say about Bill Belichick and N'Keal Harry is, hey, N'Keal Harry's tape at Arizona State was absolutely amazing.
But I don't think you, like, and sorry to cut you off, KJ, but, like, I think if you look at George Pickens and Tyquan Thornton, I think anybody watching that Georgia team a couple years ago would say George Pickens is a better receiver than Thornton. We could see it, and they still took Thornton instead because they liked his speed better, and maybe there were some questions about Pickens' health, I guess, but you know, one guy is a good player and the other isn't. And
that's the other. And I think that's something you have to take into account. Like, even if you're having a conversation, if the Patriots go and get a quarterback in this next draft, Do you shy away from Michael Penix Jr. because he's coming off of an injury, even though he is shown to be great in a potential Heisman winner? Does that shy you away? So I think when you're looking at a college player coming to the pros, the first thing I'm going to look at is injury before tape. Then I'm going to look at tape. So if you have no injury and great tape, I'm more likely to take you than if you have injury and great tape. Does that make sense to you guys?
No, it does make sense, but I think like when you look at Pickens and Thornton, and I know this is just one example, but
because they hit harder in the NFL.
I think Pickens was just a significantly better player than him, and I think you're better off going with unless there's a major injury issue, but he was still playing in his last year at Georgia. It's not like he was sidelined. It's not like Jamison Williams, who tore his ACL in the national championship game and then was going to miss part of his rookie year, who still, by the way, went in the first round. We'll see how he does. But
right.
I just think, there's deeper root causes just than, hey, Mac Jones is playing bad right now. Hey, the offensive line stinks. It's like you got to look, but well, why did we get here? And, I mean, you drafted Isaiah Wynn in the first round 5 years ago, and he was terrible last year, and he's not on the team anymore. Like, that's a huge problem, too. And that's just one example. You drafted N'Keal Harry in the first round the year after, and he's barely in the NFL now. He's trying to hang on with the Chicago Bears. Like, that, right. To me, that all – like, don't you think we'd feel a lot better if the Patriots had Deebo Samuel and a great tackle right now that they had drafted in those 2 years back-to-back?
You're not completing the whole dream. Right, because like you just had Deebo Samuel suffering
and
with
I'm not
everybody
disagreeing.
else.
Like I get it, but I think I don't think we'd be sitting here at 1-4 if we were worried about Deebo Samuel getting his feet in bounds against the Eagles instead of Kayshon Boutte.
Yeah, but at the same time, I think if you're like, hey, if Jimmy Garoppolo was here, you might be able to do some more things. So to the caller's question about spending, active spending, Cincinnati's won, call it at $205 million, and that includes the new money for Joe Burrow. The Patriots are 16th. Below the Bills, the Colts, the Bears, the Lions, Dolphins, Broncos, Seahawks, Cowboys, Falcons, Ravens, Giants, Commanders, Chiefs, Jags, and Bengals. So the Patriots spend above the league average. Saints below them, Jets below them, Titans below them. And then if you want to look at who spends the least in the league, active money is Arizona, and they're just below Green Bay. So that narrative that like they're very last in active spending is incorrect.
I do think, though, that's a little skewed, the numbers you looked up, because they went so crazy in 2021. Like, if you do look at some of the, like last year, there was a lot of good.
But that affects how you spend.
No, and I'm not. But I think, like, they had 1 year where they went all out instead of a few years where they brought in some significant pieces. Like, there was a lot of, or not a lot, but there were several high-end offensive tackles available in free agency last year, and instead of spending on them, they went with Calvin Anderson and Riley Reif. Like, I think so. Like, I agree that, hey, what you did in 2021 might affect you to a point going forward, but I think they still have missed some opportunities to spend money on guys that would be a higher impact than what they brought in.
Well, the other side of that, their dead money is below the league average, right? So if you're talking about, okay, money that you're still spending on probably a contract that you moved on, they're below the league average in terms of dead money. So they're mid-level in the league in terms of active spending and below the league average in terms of dead money on the team. So you can make that conversation about, is it the GM situation? Who makes the decisions? I've said that before. Bill Belichick is nowhere near a Hall of Fame GM. And, sometimes when you're in charge, you don't want to bring someone else to be in charge as you're still the head coach. So that's why that doesn't factor. I'll get into the Belichick aspect in a little bit. I do want to get back to the Mac Jones situation. So you remember a couple weeks ago when Will Grier was acquired? I believe I said it, Arcan said it, and I believe Adam Jones here on the station said it as well, that the acquisition of Will Grier might have been more of a statement about Mac Jones than it was anything else. And the pervasive thought was, no, that's because Bailey Zappi is so bad. Look where we are now. There are reports that, hey, if Mac stinks it up tomorrow, Will Grier is in there, and we could be seeing the phasing out of Mac Jones potentially. So I always thought that, hey, when you're trying to address your backup situation and you never got a real veteran, like you never went and got like an Andy Dalton to say, okay, here's what I see that you're doing right, here's what you're doing wrong. Brian Hoyer, while it's I think Hoyer will end up being a great coach, but I don't think he could ever go and explain what to do right in a game because he's lost so many games in the NFL. So you didn't get a guy in there who could say, I'm not going to be the guy, but I used to be one of the guys who can help this new guy get to that next level. That's where I do fault Belichick. If you really wanted to grow that quarterback, you would have gotten him a backup that says, hey, when we put the backup in, no one's screaming that this is the future of the team, but the team also has a chance to still be engaged in the game, and it feels like the team is disengaged because of the play you're getting at the quarterback situation.
Yeah, and Jameis Winston would have been another good option, I think.
I don't think so. Not even Jameis Winston, right? Because he hasn't, like, an Andy Dalton or, there's so few.
Yeah, but just another veteran, because right now, the position they're in, okay? Let's say they pull Mac Jones against the Raiders. I would feel a lot better if it was like Jameis Winston or Andy Dalton going in than
I'd scratch
Will
off
Greer,
Jameis Winston.
Will Greer or Bailey Zappi. I would. But yeah, it's an interesting thing because, if you remember at the end of training camp when they brought in Matt Corral, I thought that was a lot more about they had no faith in Bailey Zappi, and they were like, hey, if we have a young quarterback we're going to try to develop behind Mac, we'd rather it be Corral than Zappi. Corral obviously didn't work out. Will Greer's a little different. I mean, I know he's only played a couple games, but he's been in the league 5 years, so he's much more of a veteran than a guy like Zappi or a guy like
He's a veteran
Corral.
clipboard holder.
Right, so, but for me, when him being there, does raise my eyebrows a little bit in that, will this be the guy they go to if Mac struggles instead of Zappi because he is more experienced and Zappi was so bad for them in August?
Yeah, honestly, you almost say, why do you make a move to bring Jacoby Brissett back, right? Like, even someone of that caliber who's been in there, because, as I mentioned, your Andy Dalton types, they've disappeared, right? Because that next generation of quarterbacks that came in, your Sam Darnolds, your Baker Mayfields, a lot of those guys never really panned out. Even somewhat like, Josh Rosen. Those guys that were supposed to be
like Josh Rosen.
Right. These guys.
Wrong about that guy.
Right. These guys, even Carson Wentz, these guys didn't pan out. So there's like this ghost town of quality backups. Like, even if you brought in Joe Flacco, you're like, look, we don't expect to play him at all. But if you get him in there, he's going to manage the game.
And I think we're seeing that too. Another example, like look at the Jets. Aaron Rodgers goes down, and they have to go to Zach Wilson. I mean, imagine if you're the Jets, Super Bowl contending roster, and Aaron Rodgers goes down. Wouldn't they have loved to have had Andy Dalton instead of Zach Wilson go in? And that's just one example. But any of these guys, or if they could have lured Baker Mayfield for a year to be Rodgers' backup, instead they're stuck with Zach Wilson. Like I think you make an interesting point. It's a problem across the NFL. Like we don't see a lot of good backup quarterbacks, and part of that might be that starters just cost so much money that you allocate minimum salaries to the second and third string. But it's tough. Like I think Jameis Winston's a solid backup for the Saints behind Derek Carr, and I think maybe in the NFL there's a couple other good there aren't a lot though. Like maybe Cooper Rush behind Dak Prescott is a solid backup, but it's tough for me to think of a situation where there's solid backup quarterbacks. It's just a rarity now.
You wrote an interesting article at New England Football Journal about like what you could do to fix the Patriots offense. So you've been saying here for the first 40 minutes of the show what you could do to fix the Patriots offense. I'll tell you what. Let's get in that conversation here in a couple of minutes. We'll take a break. We'll come back. KJ and Lyons. We got your calls as well as your text. 617-779-7937. Text line 37937. KJ and Lyons, WEEI. Good Saturday to you.